thank you very, very much, all of you, for joining. It's great to have so many of you interested in beetles. This is exactly what I like to hear. So this is very much going to be a basic introduction today, because beetles, as I'm sure many of you might know already, is a pretty huge topic. Firstly, just a little bit about me. I am pretty obsessed with beetles. I have been studying them for a few years now, and I'm involved with beetles in a number of different ways, in that I'm an assistant curator at a museum, at National Museum of Scotland, but also in my spare time I do a lot with beetles too, and primarily one of my main tasks voluntarily is to co-organise the National Sylphide Recording Scheme. So I will try my hardest not to just go on about carrion beetles too much, which is the focus of our scheme, but they are my absolute favourite, and I will try and win you over to feel the same way about them as I do by the end of this morning. So my interest in beetles actually started when I was at university. I took an undergraduate degree in forensic science, so my background is looking at insects that are associated with dead things. Lovely, lovely glamorous stuff. But this led me to a couple of different positions and eventually to working in the museum environment, which I absolutely love. In normal times, when I've got access to the collection, it's brilliant. There are no 2 days the same, and I help manage a collection of 2.5 million insect specimens, which are primarily used for research, but also for education through displays and exhibitions and outreach events. And it is my duty to care for the collection, but also to make the collection accessible. So through those displays, but also make it accessible for researchers and amateurs to come and use the collection, identify their material, and just help build this knowledge base of entomology in the UK. So it's a brilliant job. I absolutely love it. And it's great to have lots of collaborators too, such as BugLife and other organisations. So thank you very much to BugLife for joining forces with me today. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction, go over some of the key morphology that we look at when identifying beetles, and then we'll just run through some of the most common and most easy to recognise beetle families. Then we'll take a little break and I can answer some of your questions. In this format, I can't see them coming in as and when, so we'll try and manage it this way. And then we'll have a section on sampling, collecting and recording beetles. So please stick around for this section. It's really, really important. It's great that you're all here today, but the important bit is that we can try to inspire you to go out and record beetles, because this is the most valuable thing that we can do at this time in order to try and protect them. And I'm going to throw loads and loads of resources at you. What I'll do is I'll have some of the most important ones up at the end, and also I've got a PDF that I can share with any of you that have got all these valuable links in there, and then we'll have some more time at the end for questions too. So I hope that's all good, and I hope that you will love beetles as much as I do. So they are pretty amazing insects. They are the largest group of insects, and you may have heard the fact that 1 in 4 of every animal is a beetle, and this is true. So far, there are around 400,000 described species of beetle in the world, which is pretty impressive. They occupy nearly every biological niche that there is. So from the Arctic tundra to the tropical rainforests, they are there. There is such a variation with beetles, which is one of the things that draws me to them. You've got some incredible giants, like the largest is the Titan beetle, which unfortunately we don't have an example of in the museum. But here in this drawer, I've got some examples of Hercules beetles from Central and South America. They're pretty large. They're up there with the biggest. And as a comparison, in that tiny unit tray is a couple of featherwing beetles, and these guys are less than 1 millimetre in size, and the smallest in that family are 0.25 millimetres. So really they occupy this incredible range of size, shape and colour, and they are pretty impressive. Now, the reason that they are so successful and they're so hyper diverse and really able to dominate in the way that they do is because they have a very long fossil record. So the ancestors of our current beetles existed over 290 million years ago, which is incredible to think about. And they co-evolved with flowering plants. So they were actually among the first pollinators. And you'll notice that a lot of beetles are attracted to very open flowers. So this co-evolution happened and really has made them incredibly successful. The other things that help make them successful is their morphology. So we're going to go through some of this now. One of the key features and the way of recognizing a beetle is its elytra, and these have really helped in making them successful. And they occupy all these different niches and different roles. So you've got pollinators, you've got fantastic predators, which help keep other populations in check. And of course, you've got decomposers, which are incredibly vital in making sure that we have a nice, healthy environment. Without the dung beetles and carrion beetles, we'd be wading through all sorts of nasty matter. So they really help keep everything in balance, which is really, really important. And we certainly notice the effects of when insect populations are declining and how this has a knock-on effect on everything else. That basic body plan of a beetle. As I mentioned, they have this key feature, this key characteristic, which is the elytra. So this is the technical name for their wing casings. And it's actually the forewings which have evolved to become hardened and shell-like. I hope you can see my cursor here when I'm pointing. So these protect the delicate membranous hindwings that are underneath that enable them to fly. So this really is a great benefit to them. It helps them against predation. It helps them when moving through the undergrowth, and it keeps those nice flight wings protected. It also helps them to avoid desiccation, drying out as well. Other features that help you recognise a beetle. I mean, obviously it's an insect, so it's got the 3 body part plan and 6 legs. But beetles also have the feature of chewing mandibles. So they have nice, strong mouth parts that help them feed on a variety of different substrates and prey. Now, you may have heard this already, but the Old English name for beetle is bitula. And this actually means little biter. So that's a reference there to those strong chewing mouth parts. Now their life cycles, they're holometabolists. So this means that they complete metamorphosis in a way that butterflies and moths do. So you have that typical life stage of egg to larva to pupa and then adult. Now with beetles, they have different instars during the larval stage. So they some have 3, some have 5 stages, and then the life cycle as well is very variable depending on what group of insects they are, what group of beetles they are. So some have a very short pupation time, maybe just a couple of weeks. Others will be in the immature stages, larvae and pupae, for maybe several years, and then only live short lives as adults. So it's quite variable, all depends on the kind of niche that they're occupying and the kind of lifestyles that they have. So when we're identifying beetles, there's lots of different structures that we use. Really important features are things like the hairs or hairiness and where the hairs are located, the body sculpturing, so any kind of pits, depressions and lines on the exoskeleton. Genitalia, that's one that entomologists often talk about. So it's one of the reasons that we'll cover later on is why it's often important to take a voucher specimen of an insect, is because sometimes identification is incredibly difficult in that there's no external features to help separate one species from another, and it's only the internal characters that show those differences. So sometimes dissection is required. And then also information like the habitat and the plants or substrates that the beetle is found on can help with identification too. It's worth pointing out that there is sometimes some confusion that the true bugs cause. Often for beginners, true bugs can look quite beetle-like. Totally forgiven for thinking that. They have what looks like a hard exoskeleton, hardened wing cases, but actually they are membranous at the tip, which you can just about make out on this picture. And they also don't meet in the center in the way that the beetles elytra do. They kind of overlap at the edges here. And another key thing, which you can't see in this image, is that true bugs have a rostrum. So they have the kind of straw-like mouth parts for feeding on plants, which is obviously very different from the mandibles of beetles. So worth pointing that one out. Antennae also come in all sorts of gorgeous shapes and forms with beetles. I particularly love those that are lamellate, like this cockchafer here. So here's the different names assigned to these different types of antenna. Don't worry, don't need to remember these right now, but these will be described when you start looking at identification keys, and they just help to separate out those key morphological differences across the different groups. But really the antennae are extremely important to beetles. They are the sense organs. They don't have noses in the way that we do, so they are smelling their environments. They are picking up those cues all from the chemical receptors that are on their antenna. So they're going to be sniffing out food and also locating a potential mate this way. Beetle legs are equally as varied as the antennae are, and it's all about how well they are adapted to their environments and their lifestyles. So you've got tiger beetles, which have very thin legs, thin tarsi, which are good for running. Water beetles have fantastic fringing of hairs on their legs, which makes them really good for swimming. You've got leaf beetles, which have hairy pads at the ends of their legs, which help them grip onto the leaves on plants. And dung beetles and other beetles that excavate soil have fossorial tibia, which mean that they're broad and they've got kind of toothed edges to them. So this helps with digging. So yeah, all manners of different adaptations, which help again to make beetles so successful. So it's worth pointing out the legs in more detail here for when you start looking at identification keys. They're separated into three parts. So you have the femur here, the tibia and the tarsus. And the tarsus is made up of individual segments which we call tarsi. So this is a ground beetle, a beautiful ground beetle called Carabus intricatus. And when you start looking at tarsal formation, what you do is you count these little segments, the tarsi, to create a number pattern. So the tarsal formation will give you the number of tarsi on the foreleg, on the mid leg and the hind leg. So when we count Carabus, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when you see this written in a key, the tarsal formation would be 5, 5, 5. If I'm overwhelming you at the moment, don't worry. Hopefully it will all make sense. It clicks at some point. So a little bit more of an overview. The order Coleoptera, which is all beetles, is divided into 3 suborders. You don't need to remember this right now, but overall I want you to take home that there are over 4,000 beetle species in the UK. Now this is a large amount of beetles. I am very a long way off knowing all of these beetle species. I think I'll be in my 80s or something by the time I've seen most of them and remembered half the names. So today really is an introduction. Don't worry about trying to remember all the little details. I really just want to enthuse you to have some interest and learn more about beetles. We've got 103 different families of beetles in the UK, so we're just going to cover 10 or 12 or so of these families and the ones that you're most likely to encounter. Now, if I'm overwhelming you with the taxonomy, I'll try to just give you a little bit of an explanation now. If you're not familiar with the kind of naming system, this helps to break it down. So all animals are in the one kingdom. We then break this down further into phylum. So the way that we classify plants and animals is based on the shared morphological characters. And phylum, the Arthropoda, refers to all animals in the animal kingdom that have jointed appendages. So insects fit in there nicely, and insects are in the class Insecta. And then the order that we're looking at today is Coleoptera. Other orders are, Hymenoptera, Lepidoptera. These are all the other insect orders. And then within Coleoptera, we've got those 103 beetle families. And just as an example, I know I'm biased, but Sylphidae is one of the families. This refers to the carrion beetles. And then within that, you have the binomial naming systems where you have a genus and a species. So this one here is Necrophorus investigator, but don't worry, we're not going to take everything to species today. We'd be here for days. So today we are focusing on that family level. And so here's some of the families that we're going to feature today. And we're going to kick off with ground beetles. Ground beetles are a nice group to start with. There's a reasonable number of them, around 370 species in the UK, and they're quite characteristic in their shape. Once you get your eye in, you can really start to recognise beetles based on their kind of general shape and appearance. They have that simple tarsi formation I mentioned with the carabid there, so they've got 5, 5, 5. And their antennae are thread-like. They're what we call filiform. There's no strong club there or anything. It's just these thread-like antennae. And they are voracious predators. So they've got these thin, long legs, which are good for running and attacking, catching prey. And they've also got some pretty hefty mandibles on them as well. And now, with each of the slides that I take you through with the beetles, we're going to also provide you with some links to good resources to use. Don't worry about making a note of these just now. I will have a resource for you with all of these in at the end. Another feature of ground beetles is that they have these hind trochanters that are lobed. So if you flip the beetle over and you had a look at where its hind femora are, you have these lobed parts just below. But as I say, once you've got your eye in, you can recognise a beetle from above, a ground beetle from above. So this is the general shape, and just picked a few different species here for you. They are really fantastic predators, and they are nice and easy to find. Ground beetles, as their common name indicates, are found mostly on the ground. So they're going to be in nice little nooks and crannies under rocks, under mossy areas, under logs. So go hunting in those kind of places to find them. Some of our beetles are pretty easy to locate, common species, but some are incredibly scarce. So in the UK, we just have 2 bombardier beetles, and this one is particularly scarce, with just known from a couple of sites in the south of England. But it is one of those fantastic beetles that has that iconic behaviour of squirting out boiling hot acid onto potential predators. So really well equipped with defence mechanisms. On to the next family, which I'm sure will be familiar to many of you, the ladybirds. Coccinellidae is the family name. And we have 46 species recorded in the UK and recorded very, very well. So I'm sure you've all heard of the UK ladybird scheme, which has been running for many years and has inspired many, many people to get involved and share their sightings of ladybirds. They're an iconic group, really great for beginners. And nice and big and brightly coloured. Brightly coloured because they have that aposematic coloration. This is a warning coloration to help them defend themselves against predation. And the larvae also have it too. So quite a lot of the larvae have bright orange or yellow markings on them as well. They're excellent predators. Both larvae and adults feast on aphids and other small invertebrates, and they are a gardener's best friend, really. There's some fantastic resources out there. I would thoroughly recommend the new field guide with the wonderful illustrations from Richard Lewington. This covers both the adults and the larvae. Really, really fantastic resource. So just to go over a few, oh, I forgot I added this photo. Oh, this is very exciting. Just when you think that you've seen all the 7-spot ladybirds that you can see, because that's the one that we're all quite familiar with. During lockdown, I actually saw for the first time a 7-spot ladybird without its spots. So it freshly emerged from pupation. You can just see its cast puparia here, and it within 2 hours had formed its spots, which is really, really fascinating. I mean, all the 7-spot ladybirds that I'd seen in my life so far, and I'd never seen this happen. So this is definitely something to look out for. If you see a ladybird without any spots like this, it's probably freshly emerged. So there's some fantastic ladybirds in this group. The orange ladybird, which is big bright orange with these lovely white spots. One that you've probably heard of is the harlequin ladybird, which is a invasive species. And unfortunately, it can be a little bit tricky to identify when you're new to ladybirds because it comes in such a variety of forms. In fact, there has been 100 different forms already recorded of this species, so very, very, very variable. One of the key features that it has to help you recognise it from other ladybirds is that it has this M-shaped marking on its pronotum, which you can hopefully see just here. And this is just the conspicuous ladybirds, but there are many inconspicuous ones as well, such as this beautiful red one here. And these are, once you've got your eye in and you're familiar with the common species, these are definitely worth looking at. Some very lovely, almost cute looking ladybirds in the inconspicuous group. Moving on to longhorn beetles, get their common name for the very obvious reason that they have very long antennae. So the family name is Cerambycidae. There's roughly 69 species recorded from the UK, but these are not all resident. So this is a group that often we get imports coming in through imported timber and things, because these are saproxylic, they're wood-feeding species. The larvae develop in wood, so occasionally non-native species occur in the UK. They're very active as adults in the summer months. Many of them are attracted to flowers, particularly your umbellifers, where they'll be feeding on the pollen there. So they are incidental pollinators, but predominantly they are associated with wood, and they have the amazing ability to actually digest cellulose and lignin, which means that they can actually feed on living wood as well as dead wood. And this is what makes them have that unfortunate status of a pest sometimes. They have these fantastically long antennae. Some have reduced elytra, and they have a tarsal formation of 4-4-4. Now, there's a fantastic fold-out chart produced by Will Heaney and Katie Potts of the Longhorn Beetle Recording Scheme. This is a really fantastic guide which covers about half of the British species. Would recommend checking that out. But also, Will and Katie, who run the Longhorn Beetle Recording Scheme, have made lots of free resources available through the scheme, which they host on their Facebook group. So definitely worth looking at those. Here's just a few longhorn beetles to give you a feel for the family. Some incredibly long antennae here. And we have the lovely wasp mimicking longhorn as well, absolutely gorgeous. Now, I mentioned they have these really long antennae, but there is a genus, which is Ragium, which has slightly shorter antennae. And I'm just showing you here how well it is camouflaged against this tree trunk. But here's a closer up look. So you can see the antennae are still very long, but they're not quite as long as some of the others. They're pretty robust. There's 3 species that all look quite similar, but you separate them based on their colour patterns on their elytra. Moving on to click beetles. The family name is Elateridae, and there's 73 species in the UK. Now, they get their common name because of their amazing ability to jump in the air. And they do this because they have this this kind of sticking out part. The name for it is the prosternum spine, but basically it's this rigid structure, a spine on the underside, which fits into a little pocket. So when they flip this out, they are propelled into the air, and it does make an audible click, which is how they get their name. Now, they're doing this behaviour to try and avoid predation. It's as simple as that. They have this kind of iconic shape. Okay. And there's often sexual differences between males and females with the antennae. So they, you can see the beautiful pectinate antennae on this one here. We have soldier beetles next, Cantharidae. Now, these can sometimes be confused with longhorn beetles because they too have quite long antennae and a slightly similar body shape. The differences are that these have very squishy elytra compared to the longhorn beetles, which are nice and robust. They are often nicknamed squishy beetles by those that work on this group. And they also have the slightly different tarsal formation. So if you get a hand lens and you have a proper look at their feet, they actually have 555 on those tarsi rather than the Longhorns, which have 444. So that helps you separate them. There is some really brilliant resources to identify this group produced by Mark Gurney. So I'll make sure you've got a link for that. And they come in a variety of colours. There's lots that are red, and the ones that I'm sure you are bound to see because they are so numerous in the summer months is the bonking beetles. Yeah, that's the common name, another common name for the red soldier beetle. They are quite prolific and they love umbellifers, so you will see them feasting on pollen in the summer months. Yeah, they're a fantastic group, a great group to look out for on sunny days. And next up, we have my favourite group, carrion beetles, which is the family Sylphidae. So we have 21 species recorded from the UK. They're pretty distinctive beetles because many of them have, like ladybirds, this aposematic coloration, so this really striking bright colour on their wing cases. Now, you either recognise one subfamily or the other. You have the burying beetles, and then you have the other carrion beetles. And the burying beetles have very strong clubbed antennae, whereas the others don't. They have slightly expanded tips to the antennae, or they're completely thread-like. Now, they have really, really fascinating behaviour, which is what draws me to this group. The burying beetles display biparental care of their young, which means that both male and female will work together. They locate a small dead animal such as a bird or mouse, and they literally do bury it. They excavate soil from underneath the carcass, drag it down into the soil, cover it over, and then they prepare this resource to make a lovely home for their offspring. So they really kind of make a nest, they remove any fur or feathers, they coat it in secretions which actually help preserve the carcass for longer. And then once the eggs hatch into larvae, the larvae sit in a crater at the top of the carcass where they are fed directly by the parents. So the parents feed on rotting flesh and then regurgitate to the kids, which is absolutely brilliant. So you have the burying beetles doing that incredible behaviour, but also just the family as a whole is quite fantastic too. So it's diverse. We've got carrion feeders, but we've also got a couple of predators in there. So we've got those that attack snails, and we've got those that attack caterpillars. Others that are vegetarian. So within this small family, we've got quite a lot going on. So I help co-organise the Sylphidae recording scheme for this group. Would love your records. And we've got free ID keys available via the website. But also, as Craig mentioned at the beginning, we have just released a book as well. So I've worked with Steve Lane on producing an atlas of sylphids, cysterids and spheroids of Britain and Ireland. So lots more information about their ecology and things in there, as well as detailed keys and plates. But as I mentioned, we have got free ID keys available as well. So I absolutely love this group, but I have to give a mention to the clown beetles as well, which is the group we've partnered with for the book. Taxonomically, they're quite separate, but they occupy the same niche. So many of the clown beetles also are attracted to dead things. So really, really important groups. The carrion beetles, the sylphids, are there actually feeding on the carrion itself, but the hysterids, the clown beetles, are feeding on the things that are feeding on the dead stuff. So these guys will be attacking the fly eggs and larvae that are feeding on decomposing remains, but there are also a few that are feeding on fungi and also dung, feeding in dung, looking for other invertebrates to predate on there. They have a retractable head and retractable legs, which really fit in very snugly and under their underside. So this is a form of defense, really, but it means that they can be really tricky to mount when you take a specimen, sometimes to get the legs out. I sometimes say that these beetles look a little bit like apple pips because they are very smooth, usually black and incredibly shiny. And there are 53 species, and there's a new key within the book which really helps to identify this group. So I hope that some of you will take a look at these guys because they are fascinating, really, really amazing tiny beetles. I say tiny because some of them are really small. They're, as you'll see from this one previously, 3 to 4 millimeters on this one. But they are lovely. Some have striking red markings, some have lovely blue iridescence, and Hololeptoplana is amazing because it looks like somebody's just stood on it and squashed it. It's really, really flat, and this is one that actually lives under bark. Yeah, hence the shape. Another closely related group, because of the niche that they occupy, is the dung beetles. So they'll also, if you're going to be poking around surveying in dung, you will find dung beetles, hysterids, and sometimes carrion beetles. Now, the dung beetles and scarab beetles in general fall into this family of Scarabaeidae, and there's 80 species recorded in the UK. And they have antennae with lamellate clubs, so like that cockchafer that I showed you earlier, fantastic clubs that when they're sniffing the air, they separate out, and you can see them moving as they are sensing those smells. And this is an antenna that's great because it's got like an amazing amount of surface area there to detect all those scents. They have mandibles that are concealed from above, so you can't see them dorsally. You've got some that are dung feeders, but some that are phytophagous, so some that are feeding on plant material and pollen as well. There are some really fantastic resources provided by British Scarabs. So this is the Scarab Recording Scheme, and if you do take an interest in dung beetles and scarab beetles, thoroughly recommend checking out their website and sending all your records to them. Unfortunately, dung beetles aren't doing so well these days. They do suffer from use of ivermectins that are given to livestock, which pass through into the dung. So some of the dung beetle populations are in decline, really not doing so great right now. But the way that we can help dung beetles is to record them, like all other beetle groups. So the more recording, the more knowledge base we have, and the more it will inform conservation. So here's a couple of images of some of the gorgeous scarab beetles that we have. We have the common cockchafer, which is Melalontha melalontha, but also the northern cockchafer, which is the scarcest species, Melalontha hippocastani, which is predominantly found in Scotland. So I hope most of you are based in Scotland and will be able to go out and start looking for these beetles. This is one of particular interest. So if you do see this one, please submit your sightings. They are attracted to light, so if you run a moth trap, then these beetles will be potentially invading your traps. There are some gorgeous little chafers out there as well. The bee beetle, which we get in Scotland, really stunning beetle. But for the most part, most of the group are of this type, the aphodiines. They have this very similar shape. They're all quite small. They're under 10 millimeters, and there's about 60 of those. So you really need to have a hand lens or a microscope to identify some of those. Now, these ones here don't fit within the Scarabaeidae family, but they are Scarabaeidioidea, so they're in the superfamily, and they are therefore very closely related to the other scarabs. So these are the geotrupids, the troch species, and the lucanids. So I'm just going to close my blinds. I'm getting blinded. So one group that you'll definitely recognise are these geotrupids, the door beetles. They're nice and visible in woodlands during the summer months. They bumble along quite merrily along paths and things, and sometimes you'll see them upturned as well, and you'll get a glimpse at their beautiful iridescent undersides. They all share the clubbed antennae feature, and again, some fantastic resources available through British Scarabs, so definitely worth checking out. The door beetles are dung feeders. The lucanids feed on wood. Their offspring are wood feeders, and the hide beetles, or the troch species, they feed on the dry remains, dry carrion remains, can often be found in nests. So they're feeding on the keratinous structures, any skin and feathers, so hence why they can also be found in birds' nests. Moving on, we've got the leaf beetles. Leaf beetles are a lovely group. They are quite diverse with 250 species in there, and they are quite beautiful. They're like little gems, so they're often metallic with iridescent colour, really striking and noticeable when you see them on a plant. They have this general body plan where they're quite smooth, oval shapes, and they have this thread-like long antennae. So sometimes you may think they have a kind of similar appearance to ladybirds, but ladybirds have short clubbed antennae, whereas the leaf beetles have much, much longer antennae. The other feature of leaf beetles is that they have these heart-shaped pads on their tarsi, these lovely bilobed tarsi segments. So you can see that with the hand lens, and for some of the bigger species you can see it with the naked eye too. A species within this group that you'll probably encounter at some point is the rosemary beetle. Unfortunately, this is one that is given pest status, but it's a really gorgeous little beetle. I would be quite happy for it to feed on my rosemary if I had some. Within the chrysomelids, we also have the pot beetles. Now, these are really, really fascinating. They get their common name because the larvae form this protective shell, and it's actually created using their own droppings, which is brilliant, right? Upcycling. And Bug Life have done some brilliant work to monitor the pot beetles because some of them are incredibly rare, and we need to know more about their distributions. So there's a great resource through the Bug Life website on identifying pot beetles. Some other beetles within the chrysomelid leaf beetle family, there's a few here. So we have reed beetles, which have a slightly different shape. As their name indicates, they are associated with reeds. Then we have the largest of the chrysomelids, which is the bloody nose beetle, and it gets that name because it exudes a drop of red fluid from its mouth when you alarm it. Again, a fantastic defense mechanism for avoiding predation. Then we have the tortoise beetles, which are probably one of my favourite within this group. Like the pot beetles, they use their excrement to do all sorts of useful things. So for the leaf beetles, the larvae will carry around their shed skins and their feces on their back as like a little poop umbrella. Fantastic. It kind of helps conceal them from predators. Yeah, what's not to like there? Another one that's familiar, especially if you're maybe a gardener, is the lily beetle, because like the rosemary beetle, it's been given a pest status. It does incredibly well, probably too well for its own good. Now, another really, really large group is the Rove beetles. Now, Rove beetles refer to the family Staphylinidae and are sometimes nicknamed staphs. They're quite a challenging group to identify. It's a group, I must confess, I tend to avoid because my dissection skills are not that great for some of the smaller species. We have over 1,000 in the UK, so it is our largest group, I believe, of beetles in the UK. So it's a quarter of our beetles in 19 subfamilies. It's quite a lot. Now they have a very characteristic shape. So you'll notice the first thing that you notice about staphylinids is that they have their abdomen very exposed. They have these really short elytra, those short wing cases. But this is what's helped make them so successful. So they do have wings under here. They pack up incredibly neatly, but they are good flyers. But having these short wing cases gives much more flexibility. So they've got lots of potential to move into smaller spaces and just better mobility. So yeah, one of the reasons that they're so successful and so diverse is their shape. You may recognise this shape from if you've ever encountered a devil's coach horse. So this one here is the devil's coach horse, Occipus olens, and it does this fascinating and very distinctive behaviour if it feels threatened. So it rears up its abdominal segments almost as if it was a scorpion or something. But actually the rear end is totally harmless, and it's actually the other end that you'd need to worry about if you were a predator or prey. They have fantastic fierce mandibles. So this is the largest of the staphylinids that we have in the UK. Many of them are very, very small, like Anatomical and Stennis. Stennis is a really fantastic species. They have really interesting methods of predation, and they even have a labrum, part of their mouth part, that can shoot out to help capture their prey, which is fascinating. You can also tell when they're excellent predators and they have these big bulging eyes. onto another enormous family, which is the Weevils. So Weevils, the true Weevils, are in the family Curculionidae. So we've got over 600 species recorded in the UK. Now, this is about the same as the number of birds that have been recorded in the UK. So for every bird species, there is an accompanying Weevil species. They have clubbed antennae that are elbowed. So this is one of the key features for this group. And the first segment of the antennae is extended. It's incredibly long, and this is called the scape. They also have the iconic long rostrum. So this really long nose-like structure, and the mandibles are located at the tip of that. They're also usually covered in tiny, tiny scales in a similar way to moths and butterfly wings. When you get a close-up look at a weevil, particularly under a hand lens or a microscope, you can see that they're absolutely coated in really, really beautiful scales. Now, all species are herbivorous, and of course, the way that we grow things in massive monocultures, we do end up sometimes having them as agricultural pests. It's not the weevil's fault. So just to show you some of the diversity here, vine weevils, of course, is one that most of us will know, be familiar with from our gardens. And there's a whole wonderful diversity of beautiful, shining, iridescent weevils too. And at this point, I want to give a huge plug to Mark Gurney's Weevil Field Guides and Identification Keys, because they are absolutely excellent. Another great free resource with some top class images that are really, really incredibly helpful for identifying these beetles. Now, this is just, I've just mentioned for the family Curculionidae, but there is another weevil family, the Apionidae. And this features some of the rather charming little gorse weevils that you can see in the spring and summer on the gorse. So those are the families that I've chosen to tell you a little bit more about today, but I'll just touch on a couple of other ones that are also the ones that you might see. We've got pill beetles, the birids. These are often found if you're going to be looking for ground beetles and other things, you might encounter these. If you set pitfall traps, you might encounter these. Pollen beetles, which you're bound to see if you start looking at flowers. These are the natigulids, little clubbed antennae, little tiny black jobs, but they are very numerous and they love feeding on pollen, so one to watch out for. Water beetles, which actually encompass 3 different families. You've got diving beetles within there, whirligig beetles, all sorts of fascinating behaviour. They really have dominated the aquatic scene really successfully. And then carpet beetles, so this is the family Domestidae, and although we will mostly know of them through their association with our indoor environments, being pests of our homes, and sometimes pests of insect collections. It's a curator's worst nightmare to have carpet beetles. But they're also, the adult stages are feeding on pollen, so they're also going to be found on flowers, another one to look out for with the pollen beetles. Then we've got flower beetles, the Edemiridae. This contains a group of kind of similar to longhorns. They look similar in their body plan, but they have different tarsal formation. So they have 554, I think. And they have beautiful iridescence, and they also contain the species that's called the thick-legged flower beetle, which has fantastically chunky hind legs. Woodworm, another one that unfortunately gets the pest status because it just is really great at feasting on wood, Anobidae. And oil beetles, the Meloidae. So this is another fantastic group. Again, one that BugLife have done some great surveying for and have some great identification keys for, which I'll come to later on. And then we've got the glowworms, which is the Lampyridae, and they are iconic for their ability to glow. The males look like most other beetles. They have wing cases, nice hard wing cases, but the females look like their larvae. They look very, very different, but it's only the adults that have this ability to flash, and it's all about attracting a mate. So at this point, we're going to have a little break. I've talked at you for quite a bit now, so we'll take some questions. If Craig can read them out to me, or I can stop sharing my screen temporarily.
That's great. Thanks, Ashleigh. There have been questions coming in since you started, actually. So obviously quite a lot of interest. I'll start at the beginning. Javier has asked how long do they live, and I think it's a very general question relating to beetles. Is there an easy answer to that?
How long do they live? It depends on what group we're looking at. So for sylphids, for carrion beetles, they spend just over a month developing from egg to pupae. And then as an adult, they could live anywhere from a few weeks. They may be unlucky to be predated on, or they are capable of living, I think it's almost 200 days, several months anyway. But then you've got things that spend most of their time in the immature stages. So they may be developing underground for several years and then only live as an adult for a few months. So yeah, it's very variable across the groups. Depends what group we're looking at.
Okay. I might get the pronunciation of this suborder wrong, but Amy was asking what is the one species in the Myxophaga suborder? Is it Myxophaga or Myxophaga suborder?
Yeah, Myxophaga. What was the species?
Yeah, you said there was one species in that suborder.
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head.
That's all right. We can look it up. We'll find the answer to that. Shannon had asked how many species in the UK, or was that 4,000 species in the UK? It's over 400,000 worldwide. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Just scrolling through, Mark has said, I thought tiger and ground beetles were two separate families. Has the phylogeny proven them to be one and the same?
I did feature the tiger beetle in there. Tiger beetles had previously been in Cicindelidae, but that taxonomy keeps changing. I may not be up to date with it.
Charlotte's just commented, I'd give my right arm to see a Timberman. Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing one either. I'm not sure I'd give my right arm for it, but Georgina said, amazing photos. Can you recommend a macro lens to use for a DSLR or mobile phone adapter? Can I just make a comment on that? Because Craig McAdam in one of his talks had recommended that if you are using a mobile phone and want a cheap answer to macro photography, a hand lens and a bit of blue tack on your camera on your mobile phone is a very effective way of getting an excellent macro lens. That was a top tip from Craig.
Yeah, that's really great. I've heard of people using that before. I have a little tiny clip-on lens as well for my mobile phone. It was less than £10, and that's
We seem to have lost Ashleigh again.
sorry, all. I dropped out again.
Oh, that's all right. No worries.
It was an okay time to do it, I suppose, during questions. Hopefully.
I think I lost signal briefly there as well. Bear with me. I'm just trying to get back to where I was in the questions. Yeah, sorry, you were saying about the clip-on lens that you have for your phone, Ashleigh.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend getting one of those. It helps you get a closer look and enables you to get those record shots of some of those key smaller features. And There's lots of advice that can be given by professional macro photographers about the other more professional lenses. I'm not the right person, I'm afraid.
Grand, yeah, that's fair enough. Gosh, sorry, bear with me. I'm scrolling through. If you see a red soldier beetle on an umbellifer, is it going to be a red soldier beetle, or could it be one of a few species?
Yeah, there are a few other red-coloured cantharids, so it's good to get photos and double check. But when you see them in huge numbers, it is usually that one.
Charlotte's asking about the mites that they carry. I think, is she referring to the mites on carrion beetles? Is that called a symbiotic relationship? Sorry, she can't remember the word. It is a symbiotic relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, generally it is thought to be symbiotic. So you get these phoretic mites that can be found on carrion beetles, and they can be found on some dung beetles as well. Generally, they are hitchhiking a lift to get to wherever the beetle is going to. They have the same goal, to get to carrion or to dung. But for the mites, that's because they want to feed on the fly eggs and larvae that are present. So generally, yeah, that's beneficial to the beetle because it's helping eradicate some of that competition. But there has been some research that shows, for carrion beetles at least, these mites may also predate on the beetle eggs. So it may not be as helpful as we previously thought.
Mark's commented that he loves how the histers have elytra a little too short for their abdomen. Not as extreme as the Rove beetles, but enough to look like they've had too much, he said, had too much Christmas dinner and their trousers don't fit as well. Very good. Yeah. Okay. Rosalind's commented that she's already asked for your book for her birthday later this month. I've just shared a link to the Field Studies Council website that's selling your book that's just been released, Ashleigh. So a link to that is in the conversation. Sarah has asked, how do you preserve the larvae without keeping them in isopropyl alcohol?
We're going to get to preservation a little bit later on, but actually I haven't included larvae, so that's a really good question. Larvae are best kept in alcohol, unfortunately. I know alcohol can be a tricky thing to get hold of, not the drinking kind, the preservative kind, as a more amateur, but really it is the best way at preserving those characters because they are more fleshy and squishy. If you let them dry out and desiccate, then they will shrivel up. It'll be like, you know, a grape to a raisin, and you won't be able to see those features, those diagnostic features. So unfortunately, keeping them in alcohol is the best way. For some of the tougher, more robust species, we do have examples in the collection of them being dried out and mounted on cards, but for a lot of the beetles, that won't work.
Okay. Shannon has asked, is the UK striped bombardier beetle population still around? She had read that its habitat had been developed on.
Oh gosh, no, I don't know about that. Yeah.
That's something we can look into.
Yeah, not on the Bug Life website, Craig.
Yeah. I'll have a look into that, see if I can find any information on it. Mike has asked, why would the underside of some beetles be so colourful?
That is a really good question. I don't know the answer. Even the underside of the wing cases of the Thanatophilus rugosus, which is the wrinkled death lover, it's one of our carrion beetles, it has shimmery blue iridescence on the underside of its wing cases. The reason is not known, but this is one of the reasons to love beetles, because there's still lots to be discovered. So maybe that's something someone can tackle.
Shannon has also commented, why are some beetles iridescent? Is this aposematic, a warning coloration?
Yeah, so So not their undersides, but their dorsal surface, yes, it has been found to be a defense mechanism. So previously it was thought that they were kind of mimicking water droplets or something, but basically just confusing predators such as birds. So they're not easily seen when on plant surfaces and things.
Yeah. Amy has asked, why are weevils considered beetles if they have a rostrum and no mandibles? I think you said that the mandibles are at the end of the rostrum.
They do. Sorry, it's a bit confusing, isn't it? That they have, it's like a rostrum, but it's not a true rostrum that, say, true bugs have. They have their mandibles at the tip there, but they're just on like a long extended snout.
Mike has asked, how much time do beetles spend in flight, i.e. when do they use their wings? I guess that varies again.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Totally depends on the species, and some actually are flightless. So not all beetles fly.
Yeah. Charlotte has commented, she studies glowworms. The larvae are slow moving, but use strong mandibles to nip mollusk prey and inject a liquefying substance. Do any of the other families do the same, i.e. the staphs?
Yeah, I don't know about staphs doing it, but sylphids do. So the species that are predatory on mollusks, like those lampyrids, do exactly the same thing. So they nip the foot of the mollusk. That causes the mollusk to recoil into its shell, thinking it's protected, but actually it's just trapped itself. There's no way out. And the beetle will, bite it again and release these digestive enzymes, and that helps break through the mucus barrier and then also starts dissolving the flesh so they can just feast on it. It's pretty gruesome for the poor snail, but I mean, fantastic approach there, and very, very successful.
Daniel's commented that he came across one of the featherwing beetles you mentioned in a sweep net sample, but couldn't find a taxonomic key for the group. When you come across beetles like this that are not commonly recorded, where do you go or begin to look for a taxonomic key, and are these freely available to amateur entomologists and recorders? Yeah,
that's a great question, Daniel. Hopefully I'll be able to answer it with some of the links that I provide. So there is some really, really great websites with lots of free resources on them. I can't think off the top of my head of one that is specifically for featherwing beetles. It's worth mentioning, because it's not one that I mentioned in my slides, but it's in the resource pack, that the Royal NSOC puts all its former handbooks in PDF form on the website. So there's lots of old keys freely available there. The trouble with using them is sometimes the taxonomy has changed, so that you might be looking at old names and you might have to cross-reference and look up to see what the modern name is. But yes, and the short of it is that there's lots of free resources for you to use, so you don't need to spend lots of money on books.
There are quite a lot of questions coming through, Ashleigh. I'll try and rattle through them quick. What's your favourite beetle?
I can't say that. I love them all, but just sylphids in general.
How will beetles be affected by climate change?
Again, that's a big topic, really big topic. Depends where they're based, depends what their habitat is, what their prey is. That's a can of worms, but negatively, let's say negatively.
John's asking, how many water beetle species are there?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, sorry.
We can look that up. How to start learning. Sandra's asked, the range is huge. Any tips on where or how to start learning to ID the common beetles as a beginner? I think you're moving on to that, aren't you?
Yeah, so we're coming up to the kind of surveying, like how to look for them, how to find them. So hopefully I'll answer that in there. But I would say just start in your little local patch. Just go out there and have a rummage and see what you find. Maybe tackle some of the larger ones that you encounter. At this stage, your best resource will be a hand lens. So make sure you're armed with a hand lens and start looking at just becoming familiar with the different shapes and structures that beetles have. So ground beetles are a really good group to try. but also in the summer months, go out and look on the flowers and see some of those larger species like the longhorns, like the soldier beetles, and yeah, just start with some of the bigger things.
Okay. Rosalind's asked, are any of the beetles venomous as many are predatory?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I can't think of any.
I've never come across a venomous beetle.
No.
Thea's asked, when recording beetles, do you need to send records to the different schemes or can you just use iRecord?
That is a great question. Hopefully I'm going to cover that in the next section. So Craig, should we maybe move on to the next bit?
Yeah, I think perhaps
take 15 minutes, so then we'll have a little bit more time for a couple more questions after that.
Yeah, I think perhaps we should do that. There are a few more questions. If we don't get through the questions, I mean, I'm quite happy to run over a little bit as long as you are, Ashleigh.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
And of course, if we don't get through all of the questions, then we can respond to them via email at the end of the event. But for the time being, yeah, I'll hand over to you again, and you can crack on with the next section.
No worries. Okie dokie. So back where I left off. Okay, can you see that one all right, Craig?
Yep, we can see that. You're in, there you go, beetle habitats.
Okay, so as I've already indicated, beetles are pretty much found everywhere. So you don't need to be near a nice nature reserve to go looking for beetles. In fact, I'd actually recommend going to some of the more unattractive sites. So, you know, some of the really nice habitats have been potentially well recorded in some areas, but places that maybe haven't been well documented are those, you know, car parks, scrublands, sites that don't generally look very appealing. So it's definitely worth going and looking in these areas. And it also kind of depends on what group that you're interested in, hoping to find. Worth maybe targeting things. As I mentioned, there is some essential kit. It's all pretty cheap. All you really need to do beetles is a hand lens and some pots to put them in. Of course, it helps to then have a camera, but most of us have cameras on our mobile phones now, so that's an option. And Craig mentioned that really useful tip of putting your hand lens up against your mobile phone, so you don't even need to buy the clip-on lens either. If you want to get even more involved with beetles, though, it is helpful to have what we call a pooter, so an aspirator, and this is to suck up some of those really small beetles that can't be picked up with your hands. So it sucks it into a chamber. If you're not familiar with a pooter, you don't inhale it, though during fieldwork I've had some mishaps where the kind of gauze came off my pooter and I did swallow a couple of small carabids. It didn't kill me. And so another piece of equipment that is useful to have is a sweep net if you want to thoroughly sample grassland habitats. And really, really useful is a white tray or a white sheet. So once you've collected from an area, whether you've kind of got some leaf litter, some dung, or like a grass tussock, shaking that into a white tray and then having the nice white background to see the beetles that are crawling out, really, really helpful. So there's several approaches to try and finding beetles. Hand searching is super easy. So as mentioned, you can look under stones, under logs, under moss, even under loose bark. I would recommend being really careful and considerate when you do this, though, to always place these items and leave the natural environment as you left it. So don't be destructive in your sampling. So don't go stripping all the bark off trees, please. This is a good way of finding ground beetles and other overwintering beetles, particularly at this time of year. So definitely a nice one to try, and you don't need any fancy equipment for that. As I mentioned, you can also, in the warmer months, go and look on flowers, and this is a good way to find any scarabs, pollen beetles, soldier beetles, as I mentioned. And then if you want to be a little bit more proactive, you can set pitfall traps. So a pitfall trap is quite simply a cup placed in the ground, and it is flush with the ground surface. And that's really the most important part of setting a pitfall trap, is that it's completely flush, so that a beetle will be walking about and just drop into the cup. It doesn't have to go up and over. It's not going to work. So really just sink a cup within the ground and see what you can catch. So you can have a passive trap. You don't have to put any bait in it. You can just see who's about. But there are certain other things to do with pitfall trapping. If you're not able to check it every day, you need to make sure that you've got some holes in the bottom so that any water can drain out, or alternatively you give it a roof so that rainfall doesn't get into the cup. And also give the beetles a bit of coverage in there as well if you're not able to check every day. So a bit of soil, a bit of leaf litter, so they've got some protection from one another, because undoubtedly you'll end up with a couple of predatory species in there and you don't want them to eat all the other beetles that you've captured. You can also do baited pitfall traps. So if you're trying to target a specific group like dung beetles or carrion beetles, you can use some nasty bait in there as well. I mentioned sweeping. So as an example here of somebody doing some sweep netting. And this is good for catching leaf beetles, some of the smaller ladybirds, soldier beetles and pollen beetles. Again, it depends where you're sweeping. Another method is using a beating tray. So you can see that in this bottom left image here. Beating trays can be a little bit big, a little bit cumbersome, a little bit heavy. You can simply do it with a white sheet underneath the tree or shrub and just tapping of the branch. So what this does is it dislodges any beetles that are on there and they fall onto this white surface, so they're nice and easy to spot. If you can find a white coloured umbrella, also super useful. But yeah, you can just do it with a white sheet as well. Moth traps are an excellent way of recording and attracting some beetles. As I mentioned, carrion beetles are attracted to light, but also some of the scarab beetles, so some of the dung beetles and the cockchafers are attracted to light. And actually, Dan Asor is running a workshop very shortly on beetles that are attracted to light traps. So that's worth checking out if you think, if you already run a light trap and you might be getting some beetles to your traps and haven't quite got the confidence to identify them yet. So that one's definitely worth checking out. We've also got the identification resources to the carrion beetles that are attracted to light, and British scarabs have some resources on the scarabs that are attracted to light too. So I know a lot of coleopterists that actually run a light trap just for the beetles, and it's the moths that are the bycatch. So yeah, depends where you're coming from. Pond dipping is another one to choose if you want to focus on the aquatic insects. So for that, it is good to have a good pond dipping net, but you can also just test things out with an old-fashioned tea strainer and see how you get on. Now, I've talked a bit about collecting beetles and retaining voucher specimens, and I saw that there was a question in the chat about that, about what to do, like, are you allowed to collect? There is guidance out there on collecting. There's kind of like a code of conduct that we go by, so I can circulate that. But collecting beetles and retaining vouchers is really, really important if you are focusing on some groups. I think as a beginner, it's totally fine to just be focusing on taking photographs and tackling some of those larger species, but with 4,000 species of British beetles, you know, some of them are very, very small, so those characters that we need to identify them are also incredibly tiny, or as I mentioned, they might require dissection. So the only way that we can reliably get an identification is to retain a specimen. So obviously, as scientists, we do this routinely. This is part of our practice, but also the amateur community collect beetles too. And these collections eventually end up in museums and are used for scientific research. So there's always value in these collections. And it is advised, you know, you never take any specimens without a purpose. So it is for science, it is scientific. I do not condone collecting for collecting's sake. When you have a collection, you're then able to have this wealth of information that informs conservation. So every specimen within our collection at the museum has a series of labels underneath. And this helps us learn more about where these beetles came from. We can look at the distributions of the past and compare them with the current distributions and see how these populations are changing over time. Now, when it comes to the preservation of specimens, and there's a question on larvae, but this one just predominantly focuses on the adults. There are several different ways. The nicest and kindest way, I think, is freezing, and this also doesn't interfere with DNA if scientific work needs to be done on that later on. So putting them in tubes within the freezer, their mobility slows down and they kind of just go to sleep and pass away that way. Other methods include dropping them into alcohol using ethyl acetate, or the old-fashioned method is laurel leaves. So just having an airtight jar, crushing up the laurel leaves and placing them in there, and they actually release cyanide, but please be very careful if you look at doing this option. And then when you've got your voucher specimen, you need to prepare it in a way that it's going to be kept in a good condition for indefinitely, so that it can be used. Now, there are various different methods for doing this. Carding is the traditional British way of mounting beetles, so preparing a specimen of beetle. There's pros and cons of this. This isn't the way that everybody else does it around the world, and we're sometimes made fun of for preserving our beetles in this way and obscuring the underside features. But most of our identification keys are produced based on dorsal features. So mounting a beetle specimen is actually good because it protects the appendages. So the antenna and the legs are incredibly delicate once they've dried out. And if you have them pinned, they're at risk of being knocked and damaged. So carding is an effective way of keeping the specimen in good condition. And what's really important that is for any mounting glue you use, for it to be water soluble. So it is reversible, and you could lift the beetle up off the card if necessary to look at underside features or dissect it in the future if it's not already dissected. So there's a really great video by Mark Telfer, who's a fantastic coleopterist, on how to card a beetle, and you can see his methods there. But once beetles get beyond a good size, much bigger than this one, you can see how tiny and the dedication and the skill involved in mounting beetles. It's pretty crazy. But once they're bigger than a certain size, bigger than 5 millimeters, you can pin them. So this is another method. This is the method adopted by most other entomologists around the world. This is called card pointing. So just a small bit of glue goes onto the underside of the beetle there. But pinning is for bigger specimens. So if you've got a very large beetle, you can direct pin it and keep it that way. But the most important part of all of this is that if you are retaining a specimen, if you're pinning it, if you're carding it, you need to make sure that you keep all that information, all that data from when you collected it with the specimen. Here is some of the kit that we use. An important thing to have is a nice pair of fine forceps so that you can easily manipulate your smaller beetles. But these other things are all quite affordable and easy to source. There's a couple of suppliers here. But as I mentioned, it's really important to have that data. Otherwise, the specimen is just an example of that species. It doesn't have any scientific value. So really important that we have this information. Now, this includes where, when, who collected it, and what is it. And the way that we arrange it is in this format. So the top label will be all about locality and the collection. So you'll have the exact location, usually a grid reference or the long and lat on there. You'll have information about the habitat maybe, or the host plant, the date, and then who collected it. And then the subsequent labels will be the identification. And for us in museums, we have subsequent labels that we then have, which are to do with our donations and our collection management. Now, it's really important that labels are kept in the same order as well, because this provides a history of the specimen. So somebody may dispute your identification further down the line, but you will have a history. So their new label will be added underneath, and you would not change the order of those. But, you know, retaining specimens isn't for everybody. And if you're a beginner, you don't necessarily need to do that right now. Taking photos and getting a feel for beetles is all you need to do. And thankfully, there are some great places where you can submit your records. And the one that has my support fully and is a fantastic resource is iRecord. So you can have an account and submit records through a desktop, through a laptop, or you can also have it on your phone. So it's super accessible. You can be using it out and about in the field. So you can, in real time, take a photo and it will also capture your location as well. So you don't need to worry about going back and looking that up at a later date. So I would definitely recommend using iRecord. All the national recording schemes that most of the national recording schemes that I know will utilise iRecord as well. So myself and my colleagues who run the Silphidee recording scheme, we are verifiers on iRecord. So we see the records that are specifically carrion beetles coming in, and we look at those and we verify those for our recorders. We can be contacted directly too if you don't want to use iRecord, but I would really recommend it because it's just so simple and user-friendly. There are other websites which are really helpful if you want a second opinion, because for iRecord you do have to have an identification, but I would say that you don't need to have the full identification. So if you knew something was a carrion beetle, you could submit it as the family level rather than species, and it will still come to us. So you don't have to, and you also don't have to be 100% sure. You can have your certainty level as not sure or certain. So don't worry about, you know, maybe not being right. The whole point is that we're there to help. As I mentioned, there are some good places to search for some assistance. So there's a great Facebook group called the Beetles of Britain and Ireland, and there's lots of experts on there that are there helping people with identification. So a great place to use if you're a little unsure, if you need some pointers. And I mentioned earlier that BugLife runs some excellent surveys, and there's some really nice resources that pair with these. So definitely check those out, especially the beautiful guides that are produced by John Walters. He has both field photographs and also kind of life-size silhouettes to help you gauge the size of the insect too. And some of my favourite resources. So these websites are all excellent. We've got the UK Beetle recording website, which hosts all the resources from all the national recording schemes. There's also a great overview of the families, so you can see lots of images and get a real feel from the families that way. There's galleries with even more images, a checklist and further resources. So really worth checking that out. Another one is Mike's identification keys, Mike's insect keys, really worth looking at those. So Mike has updated old keys with new images to make them user friendly, and it's really, really fantastic. Another great one is a German website, which is in English. It's got absolutely fantastic images. Would thoroughly recommend checking that one out. So I think we'll go back to some more questions. Hopefully can answer some of those for you. I'll stop sharing my screen, Craig.
Okay, thanks, Ashleigh. That was great. I'm just going through some of the questions that have come through, and there's some discussion going on as well, particularly relating to Charlotte's glowworm research. So we'll skim by that and try and get to some of the questions directed at you. If you just bear with me one moment. Oh, hang on. There we go.
Oh, I just realised I can see the question from Daniel, which was about taking a beetle and later discovering it's a rare species. Are you breaking any laws? Yeah. You should be aware of where you're collecting. So for certain sites, you will need permission to collect from that area. So for any fieldwork that we do through the museum, we usually have to go and get approval from sites, particularly if you're going to a reserve. So you should contact the organisation that manage the reserve, or if it's private land, you should contact the owner. But if you realise that it's rare, you're not breaking any laws unless it is a protected species, of which there are very few beetles that are. But the most important thing to do will be to make sure that that record is then accessible and usable and informs on the conservation. So you're okay.
Hannah's asked, why do door beetles go on their backs?
That's a good question, but I'm not 100% sure of the answer. I did ask Darren this, Darren Mann, who runs the Scarab recording scheme. It's sometimes at the end of their lives, when they're kind of nearing their end, nearing the end of the season, and that's definitely when I found them, and they're really struggling to get their legs moving, and they're obviously not able to upright themselves like they normally would. But I don't know if that's the correct answer. Why?
Linda has asked, as a beekeeper, we are on the alert for incursions of small hive beetles. Do any native beetle species have the ability to spend years in the ground in the larval phase to emerge as hungry adults?
Yeah, certainly. So some of the larger scarabs, they do take a couple of years to develop. I don't know if how that's connected to beehives. What was that?
Incursion of small hive beetles.
Oh, okay. That's not one that I'm familiar with.
Okay. Archie's asked, this is a question that Craig's answered in the past, in past workshops of his, the difference between nymphs and larvae.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So that it's how you separate the life history. So you have holometabolous insects and hemimetabolous. Holometabolous refers to the beetles, the flies, the Lepidoptera that have that complete metamorphosis, whereas the hemimetabolous ones, like Hemiptera, they have nymphal stages. So you kind of have like it's like instars, but they each look like a smaller form of the adult. So they don't have complete metamorphosis. They don't go from looking like one thing to something totally different. I hope that explains that clear enough.
Yeah. Dragonflies are a very good example of that, aren't they? Like a miniature version of the adult, but without the wings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Archie's also asked, would you recommend any good books that cover insect behaviour?
Oh, yeah, there's several. I can't remember titles off the top of my head right now. I know there's a fantastic one that's going to be coming out soon by Ross Piper, so watch this space. It's something I can put links to in the resource pack for anyone interested.
Okay. Katie said, for anybody interested in macro photography, Nikon 105mm macro lens is very good, but it isn't cheap. There are other brands of lenses and camera equipment as well, obviously, but that's Katie's recommendation. Hand lenses, again, many different makes and manufacturers of hand lenses. Any that you would recommend, Ashleigh?
I can't remember what mine is.
I don't even know what make this one is either. It's a triplet, is it? The numbers have rubbed off of it, unfortunately, but
no, I'm afraid.
Is it 10 times magnification, I think?
Yeah, 12. Mine's a 10. Mine's a 12, actually, I think.
I think this is a 12. Yeah. Okay. Maya has asked, as consumers, how can we support carrion beetles? Will organic beef and lamb not use antibiotics? So is this a good choice?
Carrion beetles or dung beetles? Which do we mean? I think you maybe mean dung beetles. I don't know whether organic farming is the way. At the moment, there's no alternative. Farmers have to medicate their livestock against these internal parasites that they can suffer with. Obviously, there has been some examples of slightly different practices, such as those at NEP, and a friend of mine who runs her own farm is managing her cattle in a slightly different way as well. But not all farmers are able to do this because it means monitoring the livestock more closely, doing fecal egg counts. And if you've got a really large herd, maybe this isn't something that's possible, but there's one alternative is that you could bring your livestock indoors so that when they are medicated, the dung isn't as accessible to the beetles. So that's one approach. But again, not everyone can afford to do that. Yeah, it's a challenging one.
Yeah,
I definitely recommend checking out British Scarabs for more info on that. And there's also a group of farmers that are particularly interested in dung beetles too, and are doing lots of advocate work on that.
Okay. Joan has asked, could you put an ID resources list up during the break so we have time to note them down? It sounds like you've got a list of resources, Ashleigh. Would you be happy to for me to circulate that list after the event?
Yeah, that's fine. It's in PDF form, so Craig can just send that out to all of you.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's probably going to be easiest because there's quite a lot that you've referred to, and it would take a great deal of time to get it all in the conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be available after the event. I'll circulate that as soon as I can. Mark has asked, is it true that the museums have been plumbing specifically for alcohol for preservation running through the building? Not entirely sure I understand that question. Running through the building? Are you using alcohol specifically? I'm not entirely sure I understand that question. Can you see it?
I can't. I'm just scrolling now. We upgraded our system at the museum. So we previously would, just have big drums of alcohol that would have to then be, what's the word? My mind's gone blank. Put into smaller containers anyway. But now we do have it on
Decanted.
tap. Yes, thank you. Decanted. Don't know why I couldn't think of that. We do have a system where we can administer it. So it is in a system that's outside of the building. Yeah, much more effective.
Becky has asked, what kinds of conservation measures are in place in the UK to protect beetles apart from recording effort? The blue ground beetle sprang to mind.
Well, that is a bug life project. So actually, one thing that's helping the blue ground beetle at the moment is gin. I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is a brand new gin called Carabus, and for every bottle that's purchased, you get £2 going towards the conservation work by bug life. So gin is helping beetles. There aren't many that have protection status in the UK, but there are projects, conservation projects, obviously those run by Bug Life, others, there's Back from the Brink that are doing some great work. There's the rare invertebrates of the Cairngorms, and little pockets of projects happening all over the place. I think ultimately there needs to be a holistic approach where we look after the habitats, or at least have flagship species that, when we're conserving for them, they're helping a whole bunch of other species at the same time. But there is work going on. But what we can do as generalists and as individual recorders is provide data. I think that is the best way that you can have impact, is to create records.
Yeah. Rosalind's asked what are some good methods for surveying and sampling for beetles, and you kind of covered that in the second part of the presentation. So I'd suggest maybe looking, watching back on YouTube once it's gone live, Rosalind, to rewatch the second part of the presentation.
And also, Mark Telfer's website has got loads of information about different surveying techniques and collecting. So Mark's an absolute beetle wizard, and it's really worth looking at his website.
Brilliant. Catherine has asked, are there any ex situ breeding programs combined with habitat restoration and reintroduction for any of the more endangered species in the UK?
For beetles, I'm not sure. None that I know of. I'm only thinking of butterflies and things like that coming to mind at present. And flies, there's an incredibly rare fly in Scotland called the pine hoverfly, which is being bred in captivity to then booster the existing populations. It's something that's been done a lot in the US with the American burying beetle. I don't know if we're at that point where we need to be doing it for our burying beetles, but it was the whole point of starting the scheme was to try and generate more understanding of our populations and then therefore assessing the conservation status. Now we've been able to do that and obviously produce the atlas. It's given us a baseline, and so we can continue to monitor it. So it is being done in other places. I don't know of any beetles that are being bred in captivity.
I'd heard there was some, they were spreading the ladybird spider down south as well, weren't they, with a similar kind of ex situ, well, bringing the, I can't remember what it was exactly, bringing the males in, or they were bringing the males and the females in and then spreading them across a wider habitat. Grand. Blister beetles are venomous, kinda, apparently. Michelle has commented. Susan has said brownfield sites can be fantastic places for invertebrates generally and worth a look, often far more biodiverse than other habitats.
Absolutely, yeah.
Quite true. Some people are having problems with the slides. I'm just scanning through some of those comments now. Can you recommend any part-time study courses on beetles? Cara has asked.
The Field Studies Council's just released some dates for a series. I think it'll be like a 4-part thing, so worth checking that out. Other than that, I don't know. I don't really know of any official courses. There's obviously lots of other webinars available at the moment. So there's the Tiniptera Trust that have been doing some great resources. So they've hosted ones on longhorn beetles, water beetles. Yeah, have a look on YouTube. There's lots of other talks like this on there, including my one on carrion beetles. So if you want to learn more about those, you can listen to me talk about carrion beetles for an hour and a half, and you'll know everything there is to know by then at that point.
And that's on the Bug Life YouTube channel, which I'm going to share a link to. Amy has asked, what is archival link? Oh,
good question. Yeah, so also sometimes called Indian ink. It's just ink that is museum standard, so that it is of a quality that will not deteriorate over time. So it doesn't bleed when you put it into alcohol. It doesn't fade. Yeah, it's the good stuff. Some people will test out permanent markers and things and they really don't work. This isn't your only option. If you will be keeping specimens in alcohol or even dry specimens, you can write labels in pencil. This is also okay. But if you can, get yourself a archival quality pen. One that I use is Micron. Pigma Micron. I don't know if that's going to focus for you.
Yeah, we can see that.
Very small nib, because basically you don't want your label to be really big and cumbersome. You want it to be a nice small size, ideally just about the size of your mounting card if you're mounting them, or if you've pinned the beetle. you don't want it to be too enormous, because ultimately these specimens need to fit into a box or a drawer of some sort, and space is money, especially when it then comes to a museum. So nice and neat and tidy is best.
Mark has asked, on the labeling specimens page that you showed, was that a checkered beetle?
It was Trogoderma angustum, which is a carpet beetle. I don't know if it has a common name. I don't think it's the one that you're thinking. Okay. Yeah, and that was found in my flat, which to some coleopterists was really exciting because it's quite an unusual and uncommon beetle, but as a museum curator, it's not such a good thing because it's also one that's a bit of a pest. So I have to be extra careful.
Tom has asked, what is the appeal with burying beetles? I know a disproportionate amount of beetle biased biologists who seem to love them.
What's not to love? They are fantastic. It's their behaviours, but it's also how essential they are. They're really providing this vital service. They are breaking down nasty organic matter. Someone's got to do it. They do a fantastically successful job of doing it. So they're really, really ecologically important. They also have forensic applications too, which is what got me into them in the first place. So any insects that are attracted to decomposing remains, if that is a situation where it is human remains, they basically act as evidence. So they can have incredible uses there as well.
What are the major species of interest for recording in south of Scotland?
South of Scotland? I could be really biased and say I think you should be recording carrion beetles, also dung beetles, but really all beetle groups, because in Scotland most beetle groups are under-recorded. We have less bodies on the ground, more space to cover.
Yeah, I think the easiest answer there is all beetles for sure. A couple of questions. Do beetles migrate and do beetles hibernate?
They do hibernate, yeah. We say that they overwinter, so you still can probably go and find beetles overwintering at present. I know that everyone's getting excited because the sun's just come out and we're almost feeling like spring's around the corner, but they are still overwintering, a lot of them. So checking under logs, under moss, under rocks and things for overwintering beetles is a good thing to do right now. What was the other question? Do they
migrate?
Do they migrate? I don't know of any big beetle migrations. They disperse from their pupation where they've emerged as fresh adults. Obviously, that's a natural part of trying to spread the genes around and to locate a mate and sources. I don't know about migrations. I'll look into that.
Okay. What is the best thing a gardener can do to create beetle habitat?
Oh, you can do two things. Leave a log pile, so leave some nice dead wood in your garden, and also create a little pond so that you can provide some habitat for those aquatic species too. And then thirdly, just don't be too tidy. Let things get a bit wild. As nature intended it. Let the weeds grow, because they're not really weeds, they're wildflowers, and beetles need them. So yeah, that's my top three.
Excellent. I'm just sharing a couple of links to the conversation there as well. Before I continue, there are a few more questions, but not loads more, Ashleigh, so I think we will get through them, but I've just shared a couple of links to the conversation. One of them is for a feedback questionnaire, and I'd appreciate it if all attendees could spare a moment. It won't take more than a minute to fill out that questionnaire on the SurveyMonkey link that I've shared. If you've got any specific comments or questions, then feel free to email me. My email is on that questionnaire as well. And like I said, there are a number of questions coming through regarding resources and whether we can share any more resources on the conversation. And as I've said, I will circulate via email the PDF link that Ashleigh sends through to me that's got all the resources that she's referred to in it. So you should receive that in the next day or so. And I've got all of your emails through your registering to this event. So back to the questions. Oh, hang on. There's lots of thanks coming through as well, Ashleigh. So that's nice to see. Lots of positive feedback.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a bit of a whirlwind because it's such a vast group to try and cover. So we've kind of just scratched the surface today. And hopefully, yeah, you can follow up on the resources and also get in touch if you've got any questions.
Yeah. Sounds like I better start drinking gin. Yeah.
We'll buy it as a gift for somebody else.
Do you know of any conservation projects in Sussex? Love to get involved after graduating. Where can I find out more?
There's some great entomologists in Sussex. Name's gone off my head. That's a question to post into the Beetles of Britain and Ireland Facebook group, because the people I'm thinking of will be there and they can pick up on that. If not, get in touch with me directly, email me when I can remember a bit better.
Sarah has asked, can you attract carrion beetles by putting a small dead rodent or part of a larger animal, roadkill, for example, on the surface of a pot of soil?
Absolutely, yeah. The only trouble that you have is that there are lots of other scavengers that will be interested in that bait that you put out. So when I've put larger pieces of carrion out, I've usually protected them with a cage. You can just use chicken wire, but basically something that's going to prevent foxes or badgers or anything else from making off with it. So yeah, I mean, I've used for my more formal experiments, we bought dog cages specifically to keep these rabbit carcasses in. And actually on our first attempt, the foxes excavated, they dug underneath the cage and dragged the rabbit remains through the gaps in the bars. So we then had to reinforce it with smaller wire mesh underneath. So sometimes hanging traps work better for smaller bits of bait. Sorry, I hope nobody's having a snack at present.
Lydia has asked, when did Silpha atrata get renamed to Phosfuga atrata?
We only recently took that change on in the UK. So it was more formally adopted in 2018 when Andrew Duff updated the checklist. But it's been used on the continent for many, many years, and I think we've been stubborn not using it until now. Yeah.
Great. Joni's made a very nice comment. Maybe of interest, a way of supporting bug life is Smile Amazon. So her chosen charity for donations is Bug Life. Thank you very much for that, Joni. Lots of positive comments coming in there. Ashleigh, fantastic talk, really good talk. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks very much. So yeah, brilliant. I think that's all the questions that that have come through. It's just lots of positive feedback there. If you wouldn't mind filling in the questionnaire before you leave, guys, I would be very grateful for a minute of your time just to get that feedback. It will help us in the future in organising events that you can all attend. But as there's no more questions just now, like I said, I will be in touch via email with other resources for you. But I'd like to thank you, Ashleigh, for your time again this morning. Another fantastic event, a fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope it's been useful. I hope if nothing else, I've intrigued you and encouraged you to go and find out a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all for attending and engaging so much. There's been more questions today than any other workshops that I've organised, which is always encouraging. Lots of people very interested in what you had to tell us, Ashleigh, and obviously keen to learn more. So I'm sure they'll all be looking forward to the resources that we circulate. Okay. So with that, I'll sign off. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for attending and have a good day. Cheers. Bye-bye.